This lecture is to accompany Module 5, the director's job, and this one is focused specifically on the director, interpretation, and style, making meaning from a text. I'd like to start off this lecture with a quotation from the Czech-born British playwright and screenwriter Tom Stoppard. He's written many plays and films over the past decades, but the one you are probably most familiar with is Shakespeare in Love. Here we go. Years and years ago, there was a production of The Tempest, out of doors, at an Oxford college on a lawn, which was the stage. And the lawn went back towards the lake in the grounds of the college, and the play began in natural light. But as it developed, and as it became time for Ariel to say his farewell to the world of The Tempest, the evening had started to close in, and there was some artificial lighting coming on. And as Ariel uttered his last speech, he turned and he ran across the grass, and he got to the edge of the lake, and he just kept running across the top of the water, the producer having thoughtfully provided a kind of walkway an inch beneath the water. And you could see and you could hear the plish-plash as he ran away from you across the top of the lake until the gloom enveloped him and he disappeared from your view. And as he did so, from the further shore, a firework rocket was ignited, and it went whoosh into the air. And high up there, it burst into lots and lots of sparks, and all the sparks went out, and he had gone. When you look up the stage directions, it says, "Exit Ariel." I love this little story that Tom Stoppard tells because, for me, it really encapsulates what it is that a director does. Shakespeare, who wrote The Tempest, left a text with all of the words for the actors to speak, and he included a few clues about specific actions to take at particular times. In this case, it was about a character named Ariel exiting. But the director had to decide how to make that exit happen in a way that would delight the audience and be true to the ideas that were expressed throughout the play. And that, at the end of the day, is what a director's job is. A director is ultimately responsible for making all the decisions that make that exit Ariel moment come alive. So every choice, from the lighting to the scenery, to the specific movements of the actor and the special effects, to how the actor is going to say their lines, these are all the director's interpretation of Shakespeare's text. So there are many clues in texts of plays that are going to inform these decisions, and the entire company is going to come in with their own ideas on how to interpret the text. But the director is the one that needs to make the ultimate choices. And these choices are what make their productions unique experiences, which I just think is so cool. So the professional position of the director is relatively new to theater. There's only been about 100 to 150 years of officially having directors in theater. In ancient Greece, when Antigone was written, playwrights were pretty much in charge. They would explain to the actors and performers about how they wanted their lines spoken, how they wanted the actors to move and look on the stage. And if there was any choice in costume or scenery, it was the playwright that made those decisions. In Shakespeare's time, acting companies themselves, they would put on dozens of different plays, performing a play for maybe 2 to 3 days and then changing it up and producing a new play. So they switched things up all the time. This meant that scenery and costumes had to be reused a lot, and actors would tend to perform the same kind of role, like the leading lady or the villain or the clown, in different plays. So while actors had to learn their lines for the individual plays, they basically directed themselves. And sometimes an actor would take a leadership role as kind of the first among equals, and then you had managers that were handling all the financial decisions, but you didn't really have a formal director until the 19th century. This is probably because in the 19th century, we saw changes in the kinds of plays that were written and in the way theatrical companies were organized. We had this shift from producing a new play every 2 or 3 days and then repeating them hundreds and hundreds of times, kind of in random order, to companies performing one play for a longer period of time of several weeks or a couple of months. At the same time, we also had a new style of playwriting. We've talked about it before, called realism. And that kind of storytelling demanded more complicated and specific design choices for each play and a new style of acting. So theater itself became a more complicated business with more jobs required to do it and more artists involved in each production. So you had a lot more moving parts. So with all of these new moving parts, someone really kind of needed to oversee it all to make sure it was all making sense together. And that's how the role of the director was born. So in its simplest form, the responsibility of the director is to interpret the text for a unique production, right? That word interpret means to make sense of, to make meaning of the text. And the director has to collaborate, which means co-labor, work with actors, designers, and technicians to create a unified, impactful, and hopefully entertaining performance. So let's unpack these terms just a little bit more. Interpretation, making meaning. So that might mean creating meaning beyond just the basic or the literal sense of the words on the page, and really kind of discovering the artist's intent, in this case, the playwright. You might also want to be communicating a new idea that you have discovered in the text that maybe the playwright didn't intend or realize, but you see. So it's all about making sense of the text and the ideas contained in it and telling a good story in a way that excites emotion. So in order to make sense of a text, the director really is responsible for kind of analyzing it. So they're going to be unpacking those elements of dramatic structure, just as you did in your project for She Kills Monsters earlier this semester. The director is really going to figure out what the play's MDQ is, their major dramatic question. The director really needs to uncover the beats of action to really find that whole row of dominoes from beginning to end of the play and start to picture how that's going to play out. Because really, the director kind of needs to have this sense of how the play will look and sound and feel when acted out, and then make it happen. But of course, that's not all the director has to do. I feel that a big part of the director's responsibility is answering that so what question, right? When we choose a play to perform for a given audience in a given place in a given time, we really need to answer, who is this play for? What do we want to tell our audiences or ask of them? And how do we go about doing that? So this is all related back to social function that we just discussed recently, trying to have a play that both pleases and instructs, as Horace would tell us. Another thing that the director needs to kind of be in charge of is overseeing the style of a production. So what should the world of this play look like, sound like, and feel like to an audience? So oftentimes a director will develop a concept, which is a visual and an oral expression of how the director thinks the play should be performed. And then they have to kind of communicate that concept to actors, designers, and technicians who will then interpret it themselves and bring it back so that you can create this unified interpretation of the text. Now, our next lecture is going to be much more in-depth about dramatic style, but just to give you a heads up on it, right? Style is all about how we are communicating our message and our manner of expression. So we're using language and sound. Is this in formal verse? Is this in casual dialogue? Is it a musical, right? We're also talking about the visual spectacle and how the actors move about on stage and how scenery and lighting moves on stage with it. Style is going to communicate all kinds of things to an audience, from the mood to the level of reality or realism in a play, and kind of the themes that are percolating underneath the surface of the action. If you think back to when we were talking about melodrama, and I played that short video clip of Pirates of the Caribbean with Captain Jack Sparrow and the different music playing under it, that music is conveying a different kind of style, even though the visual video remained the same. So a tiny bit more on concept here. A concept is the artistic decisions that communicate a unified interpretation of a text to an audience. And Directors can have different concepts on the same play, and different concepts can create a radically different production without changing a single word of the dialogue. So ultimately, this is the responsibility of the director that is carried out by the actors and designers. Another big responsibility of the director is to literally stage the show, right? This means to combine all of those elements, the acting, the lighting, costume, scenery, the action, the sound, blah, 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 and to bring the text to life in 3 dimensions in real time in front of a live audience. Staging helps tell the story of the play and kind of fills in the gaps between the words of the script and, of course, allowing for interpretation. The staging has got to serve that text and the social function that you have chosen as a company and should please the audience. It really should look effortless and natural or organic, but obviously it takes a ton of work to get ready. So some things that go into staging the show would be developing the blocking. In theater, the word blocking means the movement of the actors on the stage. You enter in this door, you cross over to the sofa, you sit down, you punch someone, that kind of thing. They're also going to work with actors to develop the stage business, which are smaller actions or gestures of the actors in character. So a character might be doing the dishes while they're having an argument with somebody, or, sewing, or polishing a gun, you name it. Those little actions are stage business. Directors are going to be coaching the actors on finding and delivering authentic and meaningful subtext, right? The meaning behind the words. They're going to work with them on what their character is thinking and feeling and how they can communicate to the audience. And they're working on creating a coherent ensemble of actors where everybody is paying attention to everybody else and delivering an authentic experience. So a lot of this involves finding the rhythm of the action, right? Making sure that the show flows smoothly from moment to moment, and also in creating stage compositions, which are like what the stage looks like at any given moment if you were to take a snapshot of it. It needs to be visually interesting to an audience. It needs to draw our focus. It needs to help move the story along and needs to make sense. And so the director is kind of responsible for looking at that big picture as well as zeroing in on these small moments. It's a pretty tall order, so I guess that's why directors kind of get paid the big bucks and get the fame for their work. So what are some skills that a director should have? What should a director know or be able to do well? Okay, so here's a quick list. They should have really great text analysis skills. They've got to spend a lot of time with the script, unpacking all of the clues that the playwright has left and making meaning of it. They've got to be good at doing research. If a play is set in a particular period or about a particular person or group of people, the director should really be on top of that and know what that's all about so that they can learn about where and when a play is set and who these people are so that it feels authentic. They may want to also be well-versed on the playwright or the characters written about if they're based on a historical figure, or the culture in which it was written, or the time period in which it was inspired by, all those kinds of things. If you look at Antigone, we know Antigone was written in ancient Greece. It was about a particular mythology. We don't necessarily want to set it in ancient Greece, but we should know where it came from. And then if we want to set it, say, in, World War II Germany, we would want to have a lot of research into that as well so that we could perform it authentically in that new setting. Directors also need to have great communication skills because they've got to work with a lot of different people, and those people tend to be artists, and so everybody's got a different communication style, and you're talking about a lot of very abstract things, so you need to be able to get everybody on the same page. You also have to have great organizational skills because there are so many decisions that need to be made and so many pieces that need to be put into place. And the director has to keep that big picture of what they want to say in mind while they're still kind of managing the minutia of the day-to-day stuff. You've got to stay on schedule, even if things don't unfold as planned, and they rarely do. This is where a good stage manager can really help. A director needs to have a good eye, right? This is a sense of what looks and sounds good and what will appeal to an audience. and patience. A good director should be endlessly patient because making art is hard. For the most part, directors are going to be working with an existing script. The playwright may be still living or may be long dead, and the playwright may or may not be present in the rehearsal process. Or if the playwright is dead, their heirs or estate may have some control over how the text can be interpreted. So the playwright still is very central to this whole process of getting a play done, and a good director is always going to serve the playwright's vision on a given text. Now, there are different kinds of directors as well, and sometimes the director assumes so much control over a piece, they kind of become the de facto author of the play, even if there was a playwright involved. This tends to happen with works of Shakespeare. Over the years, there have been a few directors who have really put their personal stamp because they've come up with a new interpretation or a new analysis of the play or just reconceived of it in a whole new way. And when people, see that production, they like, oh yeah, that's the Olivier production, or that's the Kenneth Branagh production, or whatever. And so when they do that, the director is sometimes called the auteur director, which means like they kind of assume equal, if not greater than importance than the playwright. And sometimes there is no script to start with. But maybe the director wants to do a play about a poem or a myth or a fairy tale or a biographical person, or there's some other source material. So they have some source material to work with, and then the director and the ensemble of actors develop the play through kind of workshop experimentation. And then the script gets written from their best ideas on any given day in that exploration rehearsal process. When you're doing that kind of work, it's called devised theater. So, what is a typical process for a director to follow when they have been hired to direct a show? Well, the first stop is script analysis and research. Got to read that play a whole bunch of times, a real in-depth analysis like what you did for your She Kills Monsters project, right? Finding a really good MDQ, answering that so what question, developing the concept, and really understanding cold all of those action dominoes in a play. Or if it's not a causally structured play, then understanding what makes that script tick. And of course, they're going to need to conduct whatever research they feel they need to really unpack all of the nuance in a given text. Once the director has a good handle on what they want to say about this play and how they want to make it uniquely theirs, they're going to meet with the design team. And hopefully by that point, the director will come up with at least the beginning of a concept, and they're going to describe and share that idea with the design team. The designers are then going to take that idea, go away, do their own independent research and analysis, and come back with their own ideas and discuss it further. So there are usually several meetings and ideas get revised, and sometimes the original idea changes over time. But this is a collaboration with the design team to really figure out what to do with this concept and how to make it live and breathe on the stage. Sometimes during, sometimes after this part is when you cast the company, right? So that just means holding auditions to find the right actors for each role and then choosing which actors are going to play which part. Once the show is cast, you have to start holding rehearsals. Rehearsals are typically held in not the performance space. Now, often rehearsals will start with an introductory meeting and the designers will present their ideas as well so that the cast understands the director's concept and how the designers are going to manifest it. Then the real work begins. The designers go away, they start building the set, building the costumes, hanging the lights. While that's happening, the actors and the director are going to work together on the scenes in the play. They usually start with what we call table work, which is literally sitting around a table with the script, reading the play out loud together, discussing ideas. If somebody has questions on, a word or a moment in the play or something that's going on in the plot, those get answered and bandied about. Once the cast has been through the play a few times sitting around the table, then they need to get up on their feet. They start developing the blocking and the stage business. Now, directors are all going to have their own approach to this. Some directors like to start with scene 1 and then scene 2 and then scene 3 and work forward. Other directors like to work out of sequential order, but usually it's a lot of like small moments, working on them and then building up to longer scenes and then piecing the whole thing together. So then you start working on an act at a time and then you start working on the whole piece. So actors are going to bring their own ideas to this. A good rehearsal process is going to be one that allows experimentation and trying different things out and picking what works best and moving on. And then eventually you're in good shape for the whole show. During this time, there are going to be regular meetings with the design and production team to check progress, to make sure everybody's staying on the same page. Or if something gets discovered in rehearsal process that requires a change, you got to let your design team know as soon as possible so that they can make that accommodation, or they can say, I'm sorry, we cannot add a second story to that set. You're going to have to find out a different solution. During this rehearsal process, the director will give actors and technician notes, which is, ideas or edits or corrections on how things are being done. After a few weeks of rehearsal time and building time for the design elements, you're ready to move into technical rehearsals. This is when the actors move into the performance space and we add in all of the elements of costume, scenery, lighting, etc. to the action. This is a big change, and because we're kind of adding in all of these moving parts again, it's a lot of kind of stop and start work while we try to incorporate each of these elements into something that will look seamless. Hopefully, after a couple of days of technical rehearsal, we have all of that running smoothly, and then we do what's called a dress rehearsal. That's when you run the play from beginning to end as if it were a live performance, but you don't have an audience yet. After a couple of dress rehearsals, you might have what is called preview performances. This is when you have a performance with a small audience. That's usually a friendly audience. And this is done so that actors and the director can understand how an audience is likely to respond to the work. During this time, audience feedback sometimes results in tweaks or sometimes changes or sometimes whole reworking of scenes or shows. On Broadway, a preview means you have an audience, they've bought tickets, but you haven't invited critics. So a lot can change in previews, particularly at the Broadway level. There have been times when whole scenes have been cut and rewritten or actors have been replaced. So it can be a very fraught time. Here at Fairfield University, we generally don't do that kind of dramatic change, but we sometimes do have a preview because it's really helpful for the actors to understand how an audience is going to respond to the work, so that they might know, like, oh, they laugh at this line, so I might need to wait a second before continuing with my next line. And then finally, we get to opening night. On Broadway, opening night is the first official performance when critics are allowed to see the work. This is when a play is considered finished. No more notes, no more changes, no more reworking. It's going to be what it is. And from there, the director takes a step back and the play goes on without them. So as you can see, this is a very long and complex process that a director is involved in. And ultimately, they have to let it go and let it be what it is. That concludes today's lecture presentation. You will find in this module on Blackboard, I have included 2 short videos wherein directors are in the rehearsal process and you can kind of see how they interact with actors and designers and other people on their teams. So please watch those. Then after that, you have your journal prompt. I hope you are all well. I hope you are able to take meaning from this virtual classroom process, and I will update with a new lecture in a few days.